Welcome everyone to our Friday afternoon broadcast. Interesting people in interesting times with interesting topics. And today we have a really interesting topic. Dr. Jennifer Thomas is joining us, and she has done TEDx talks on the 5 love languages. And Jen, let's just jump right into this. First of all, what is emotional intelligence?
Well, hey, Dennis. So emotional intelligence is one of the life skills that we need. It's the ability to get along with people and to have our relationships go smoothly. So you can have all the book knowledge in the world and have an IQ that's off the charts. But if you can't relate to people, it's not going to do you that much good. So emotional intelligence is what I, as a psychologist and others, talk about in terms of that ability to understand what emotions are being expressed and to be sensitive to the feelings that are in the room, whether it's in your home or in your office.
Well, I think it's interesting. You have done work with a number of companies. Just because EQ is a stronger predictor of success in career than IQ. And you've also done it with the military, which that must have been a really interesting experience. Tell us about that.
I've had a couple of different engagements with the military, one on the Navy side that I can't go into, and then one on the Air Force side. Just about a year ago, I went out to an Air Force base in South Dakota and was sharing with all of the service members there about both the 5 love languages and the 5 apology languages. My co-author Gary Chapman and I call those 2 concepts the 2 essentials for healthy relationships. And we talk about how if you can show people love or appreciation, if it's the workplace, and if you have a way of handling those offenses that inevitably crop up, then you've got 2 really key tools for making your relationships healthy. And so as I shared those concepts with the service members, they were seeing ways that they could use those in their teams at the leader level, but all the way down throughout the troops to help them make those work relationships function kind of like an oil to keep those gears nicely greased. And then my hope is also that those service members took the concepts home and used them with their families as well to be able to keep their emotional love tanks full and to keep their offenses or mistakes that when they made them from becoming a wall within the relationship.
Yeah, great. So let's start out on the workplace side. Talk about the 5 love languages, how they could be applied.
Yeah, so this graphic shows Gary Chapman's 5 love languages. His book has been around for 25 plus years now, and it's a really practical guide for how to let people in your life know that you really do appreciate them. Too often we find that we're missing it with other people, that we might be working hard to show them, yes, I do value you or I do care about you, but if it's a marriage, the joke is like the husband who says, well, I told you I loved you when I married you, and if it changes, I'll let you know. And he may be knocking himself out, getting gas in the car, washing the car, doing the dishes, but she really maybe wants to hear those words of affirmation rather than just seeing the acts of service. So that's a common mismatch that we see within couples. But we can also see mismatches within work teams. So if an employee really wants to receive gifts, to them that means I'm really succeeding at work. If my boss or my manager gives me, something tangible, something I can cash in the bank or take home and show my family, some kind of plaque of recognition, then that gift really means that I'm appreciated in the workplace. And then you might have a boss who's completely the opposite way, who says, that's all stuff that's easy enough to write a check for or to buy, but I'm going to give them words of affirmation if that's the boss's love language. And so They might be writing notes or sending emails of appreciation to the whole team. And what's important is to realize that that will work for certain employees, but it's not going to work for every employee. There's always going to be that subset that would rather, in this example, have the gifts or something tangible that shows how much they're valued by the team.
Yeah, very good. Well, so your book around apologies, talk a bit about that.
Yeah, Dennis. So about 15 years ago, I had a concept that came to me actually as JT and I, JT is my husband. We were working through some mistake that I had made, and it wasn't getting resolved. Like the tension was still in the air. And as I imagine people can relate to, especially with this time of us all being kind of cooped up in the house, it had that feeling like there wasn't enough air in the room, and I just didn't know quite what I could do to make things better with him. And in this particular instance, I had made a mistake. I wasn't being careful, and I was at fault. And so I had said, JT, I'm sorry. But to him, that sounded kind of flippant, and he was waiting to hear something else from me. And at this point, I want to invite you and our listeners to think about, okay, well, what would he have wanted to hear from his wife? And that's important because that's going to turn to what you most want to hear in your own apologies, because we usually give what we want to receive. And in JT's case, I asked him, well, what did you want to hear? And he knew right away. He said, I wanted to hear you say you were wrong. And so that's where we have this graphic on the screen is, what are the magic words for you? And this chart that we have up shows the 5 different things that Gary Chapman and I found people are looking for in an apology. And I promise we weren't looking for 5, although we know that he likes the number 5. It just worked out that way. So I'll run through these in order, and the number of people in the image shows basically the percentage who most want to see each of the languages. We asked about 50,000 people who took our survey online what they most want to hear in an apology. And these were their answers. So the first one is expressing regret, and that's saying the words like I was, I'm sorry. I think of this as having to do with your heart, that you're letting them know that you feel pain because you let them down, or you disappointed them or frustrated them in some way. And then the second one, accepting responsibility, is more about saying I was wrong. I think of it as if I were pleading a case in a court of law, I'm pleading guilty. And I think we brace ourselves when we hear that for the word but. That's a common apology mistake. But this one really needs to stand on its own. And for both expressing regret and accepting responsibility, a key is to be specific about what your mistake was and what the consequences were for the other person who you hurt or inconvenienced. So generalities are not going to fly here, and defensiveness or the but word or trying to explain your side of things is not going to work, because when we do that, we've really left the apology arena and we're moving into damage control. And so as I work with companies and public relations apologies, I'm always trying to help them focus on these 5 languages without going off on these little rabbit trails. And so those first 2 apology languages are really focused, I think of them as being past focused, talking about the mistake we made and what was wrong with what we did in the past. Then we're moving towards the present with making restitution or making amends. Here, I want to make you whole again in the present. I want to have you, whether it was a financial loss or some other damage that I've caused, I want to make sure that today you're back in as good a position as you were before I made the mistake. And what we found is for some people, talk is cheap. And so you could use the first 2 apology languages, but they're going to really believe that you're sincere when you put your money where your mouth is and make amends to them. And our 4th apology language is revising the plan. We used to call this one genuinely repenting. And you can think of it that way if you want to. What that means in the like spiritual context is turning around from the way you were walking and walking 180 degrees back the other way. But in the business context, we talk about it as revising the plan or letting the person know what you're going to change. So now we're turning from the present to the future and talking about some steps that you're going to put in place so that you can't keep repeating this mistake on down the road. And this one's really important because especially if you've made the mistake before, or if it's a very serious mistake, the other person's going to want to know, how are you going to prevent this from happening again? Because maybe I've already forgiven you for making the mistake before, and I'm going to try to forgive you again today, but I'm going to run out of patience pretty soon. So what are we going to change? That's the focus here. And then our final apology language is requesting forgiveness. And we found that this was most important to only about 3% of our respondents. But for that 3%, it was really key. And we believe that these apology languages come from the scripts in our childhood. Whatever you had to say for mom or dad or teachers to get out of the doghouse is what you reflexively say. Just like I automatically said, I'm sorry with JT, there's a downside to that because I can be really sorry about what happened to you without accepting any responsibility for it. And that's why JT would much rather hear me or his colleagues say, I was wrong. And so these are our 5 apology languages. And I've been going into workplaces now and helping teams to figure out what are the apology languages of their coworkers. And after they've done our assessment, we post the results usually on the break room wall, so that when the mistake is inevitably made and you need to go apologize to a coworker, you have an option. You can use all 5 apology languages if it was a big deal and you really need to. But what we say is go remind yourself what their apology language is and be sure that you don't leave out that one, because that's really going to show your sincerity to them.
Well, and what an important point, because you know, a lot of people who are into statistics would look at the number of colored guys on your screen here and say, oh, I most often need to just express regret. But as you mentioned, you know, maybe that person's in the 3% and that will go nowhere. So yeah, so I love that. But how does that relate then back to the regular 5 love languages? I mean, do you in the workplace have that posted on the wall too, so that you know the love language and the apology language?
We do. If a company has time, I'll give them both inventories. For the love languages, Gary Chapman and another one of our co-authors named Paul White have come up with the Motivating by Appreciation inventory. They call it MBA for short. And the two really work alongside each other. And when I was doing marriage counseling a few years ago, I would use both inventories together for couples as well. And so I know today I may be talking to couples who are at home and working alongside each other in ways that we didn't expect to be for this 24/7 kind of setup. And I think it's really important to be aware of both. So what I would do when I was counseling couples is I would mark down their top 5 or their top rankings for both the love languages and apology languages in order for all 5. And then I would watch to see what came up. And I remember one example was a woman whose husband, at that time, he traveled and consulted quite a bit. And I know nobody's traveling right now, so it's different, but she would keep herself busy by doing different sporting things. She joined a tennis league, and they were having conflict because when he was back in town, he didn't want her going off to play tennis. And she was offended by this. Her attribution, or the story she told herself about that, was, he just wants me to sit around all the time and be at his beck and call. But if you know the love languages, you can hear it differently, and you can realize, oh, I think I know what his love language is. It's quality time. And he just didn't want her to be busy. He wanted her to sit down and talk with him, or maybe play tennis with him, I'm not sure. But it allows us to make a different attribution. And instead of getting defensive, it can allow us to say, oh, he really enjoys time with me or really appreciates me. And so those complaints actually are very important clues to what someone's love language is. And it's very similar to the apology languages, where you can listen and where people maybe say you're falling short or they want something else. Instead of taking offense at that, I invite people to stop and say, wait a minute, is there an apology language or a love language that's under the surface here that I can somehow address?
So again, the colored figurines on the screen represent the percentage of people that were in each category?
Yes, it's their first place vote. So what do they most want to hear? And one of the insights that I drew as I looked at this is, wow, if you take quality time and acts of service, now talking about the love languages screen, those two together are a pretty big percentage. So I'd like for us to talk about those for a few minutes and how during this shutdown, you can practice quality time and acts of service for the people that you're living with. Or if you're on your own, maybe you could find a loved one through a Zoom call or a phone call and just give them some of your focus. So quality time, what's really important there is to turn off your device, your other devices, and to focus on the person who's either in the room with you or across the Zoom call from you. So be sure that you don't have any distractions intruding. And then have a conversation where you get to some of the things that just haven't even come up during your regular day-to-day life. I call these bottom of the barrel topics, things that you don't get to until you've run through the busyness of life and logistics. And during this time, which I prefer to call a slowdown rather than a shutdown, we've been able to have some of the busyness of life get set aside. And we have time for more conversations about deeper wishes and maybe, what are some changes that you'd like to see us make to our routines even after this slowdown ends? And then going on to the second love language, which is acts of service. These are the things that we do that help out the other people who are around us. And I've noticed during this time that we're in the house more, that there are a lot of chores to be done. I don't know about you, Dennis, but we're now running the dishwasher every single day. And that means somebody has to unload it. And if that has just been one person's job, we're having to kind of reconfigure our responsibilities to balance it out in a lot of areas. But the dishwasher and putting away dishes is just one of those. So I do encourage everyone listening to think about what are some of the duties around running the household that may be feeling more heavy just because we're not getting a break to go out in the world and do other things. And how can I help lighten the load for those people who are doing the heavy lifting at home?
Very nice. I do have a comment from one of our listeners. I don't think there's a question in here, but it's, I've been studying French to learn a new language in the coronavirus shutdown, and maybe I should have been studying the love languages. Maybe that's a better language.
Right, yeah, I like the play on the language concept, and it's really true. If we are not speaking each other's love languages, then we're missing them just as surely as if we were speaking Chinese. They're not going to get how important they are to us and how much we value them. And the bottom line is that we do want to keep each other's love tanks full, or appreciation tanks if we're talking about our coworkers. And we don't want to be wasting our effort. And so Gary Chapman's hope and my hope is that with both the love languages and apology languages, that the efforts you'll be making are really going to hit the mark.
One of the things that strikes me, Jen, looking at this chart, receiving gifts, there's just not a whole lot of little figurines colored purple on there. And yet that seems to be the thing that everybody thinks, oh, I gave them a new necklace, or I gave them something else that expressed my love. But
Right.
what this is saying is, okay, good luck with that, right?
Exactly. And think about Valentine's Day or anniversaries. What do? We go out and spend money. But yeah, it's not showing up in our chart. And I actually, as a researcher, went back to the raw data and I looked at the items because gifts is one of my love languages. And I don't think I'm in such a huge minority as this appears to show. So I went to the items to see if it was underrepresented in any way, and I couldn't find it. The inventory is very sound, um, but I guess maybe psychologically speaking, we have a discomfort with acknowledging maybe that we want to receive gifts. It may be easier for us to talk about how we like to give gifts. And I know in my situation, it does show up in terms of how I try to care for people. If someone has had a loss, I want to talk to them and make sure they're doing okay emotionally, but I'm probably not going to turn up empty handed. I'm going to bring along flowers or something else, some soup that's going to go along with it. And that really is a gift. And I imagine that there are more of us who do that than is showing up in this chart.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's shift gears a second here, Jen. In the work we did looking at longevity trends and fourth quarter fumbles, one of the pieces that kept coming up was this concept of losing friends as we age into the fourth quarter. And of course, previous generations never dreamed perhaps that the fourth quarter could extend as long as it does today, or may extend even longer in the next 10 or 20 years as
Right.
medical advances come along. And so having those relationships, we quoted one research study that basically said, you know, uh, people in the old days didn't have friends for 50 years, for 60 years. I mean, and so what would often happen is that their friends, they get into the go-go or even slow-go years of the fourth quarter, and friends are drifting away, they're moving away, and they're having trouble tending the friends garden. They're having trouble replacing those friends. And they say, I don't have time for new friends. I broke those in 25 years ago, and they know everything about me, and I don't have any time for it. And yet those people are the ones that are most susceptible to some of the unfortunate fumbles that happen later in life. So how would you use the love languages to help tend your friend's garden?
So there are a couple of ways that we can do that. And I love that concept of tending your friend's garden, especially as people are getting out this month and gardening more than ever before. It's wonderful. And I do love friends. To me, you can't have too many friends. And you do want to, as an old Brownies or Girl Scout saying is, make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver and the other is gold. And the point is that both have value and that we don't want to just rely on our old friends, but keeping in some new, fresh voices and fresh faces can be a great way to keep ourselves young. And along those lines, I also encourage people to diversify their friend garden and to have friends of all ages if possible.
Yeah.
Yep. And so to start those friendships or to keep them going, you do want to use the 5 love languages. So these apply not just at home, as we've said, but they can apply to the people that we enjoy spending time with or that we really value as a sounding board. For those friends, we want to, as we've said before, with quality time, make sure that it's your undivided attention. So if you're spending time with them, even on a Zoom call, put aside your phone. Don't have it there where it can distract you. And if there are kids around, try to shut the door so that the kids can't come in and pull you away. You know, that awkward moment when you're trying to talk to someone and then you don't know if they're talking to you or their child. We don't want that to happen. We want to talk to our adult friends and give them the respect of our full attention. And then just going on down the list, you could challenge yourself to find a way to speak each of these except physical touch. Right now with social distancing, we can only do that with the people that we're doing home isolation with. But it's a great time for sending words of affirmation or sending a gift. And I'm a crafter, and so I have to put a plug in here for creating a gift for someone. If you, when you were younger, enjoyed painting or cooking or something like that, but you've been too busy, this is a great time to bring that skill back out, take the time to do it, and then share the fruits of your labors in ways that are safe to do. And then a second thing that I want to say in terms of tying together the love languages and apology languages is that if you need to make amends to someone for a mistake, the love languages is a great way to do that. So the love languages tie in where if I'm going to make amends to you, Dennis, for a mistake I've made, should I give you flowers or should I write you a note of apology that includes some appreciation for our friendship? Well, the answer is, well, I need to figure out Dennis's love language or appreciation language, you could call it. And then that's going to inform how I can make things up to you or right with you. And here I would like to say a word for people who maybe have a broken friendship or broken family relationship. That can be one of the most painful things that we go through, just feeling misunderstood or misjudged. And I hope that during this slowdown that people might try to offer an olive branch to someone with whom they haven't had a relationship in a long time. And if there are amends that need to be made, the love languages are a great way to get your foot in the door to do that.
Well, that's a great point, Jen, particularly in this controversial political world that, there were some that hoped that the coming together of coronavirus would mend some of that. And maybe there's been a few little examples of that, but it's still a pretty contentious political world. And so we've seen some friends who drifted apart because they just couldn't have a conversation with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And some people have a house divided.
Right.
Or, between the generations, there can be very different political views. But what words of affirmation is about is commitment and letting the person know, look, you and your feelings matter more to me than any political stance. And so let's choose to agree to disagree and to table the topics that only bring conflict between us. And let's see if we can, rebuild the bridge between us that we used to enjoy X number of years ago.
Yeah, one of the people that I interviewed for the Fourth Quarter Fumbles book said that she and her girlfriends, they have a code word when they get together, usually 5 of them. And that code word is when somebody's touched a rail that they shouldn't touch or a particular subject they shouldn't have touched, and that they should move on to something else. And the code word was asparagus. So maybe we all ought to have a code word.
That's right. And I love the idea of bringing some humor into it. So if asparagus makes them laugh, that's the perfect word. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jenna, in terms of just practical applications of this, I think the challenge that a lot of people have in this environment we're in right now is that it's become a little more one-dimensional with even Zoom. We're not quite able to connect with people the same way, and some people function very fine over Zoom, but I've heard from a lot of people, boy, I miss half the body language and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you even pick up on the love languages other than maybe they ought to get the love languages in the apology book? I would encourage everyone to go on Amazon or elsewhere and buy Jen's book. It's terrific, or watch her TED Talk. But how do you pick up relatively quickly, like in the first 60 seconds of a conversation, any kind of clue on what somebody's love language is?
Yeah, it can take time to be able to figure it out if you're just watching or observing. But the key is that we tend to offer what we want to receive. And so you can just look and see if someone starts off giving someone a compliment. Well, maybe they're a words of affirmation person, and maybe they would like to be complimented as well. And I think we're all probably starving for compliments right about now, because we're not out and about. And for women, I don't want to be shallow, but we like to wear our cute shoes and jewelry and get compliments on them. And if we're at home with all boys, it's been a long 6 weeks of this. And so I actually, when I do go out, like recently was out just doing a quick pickup with some people I knew, and we were socially distant. But I made a point to tell a lady I knew that I really liked her blouse when I might not have done that otherwise. But I figured, she probably liked to hear that more than, we need it more now than ever before. But in terms of learning what other people's languages are, it's okay to ask them. And so whether it's apology languages or love languages, I recommend that people have a conversation. I mean, we have more time now than ever. So sit down with your family or Zoom with your extended family and say, hey, have you taken this profile? Do you have your results? It's available for free on my website and others. And if they haven't taken it, you could just ask them a few things like, what makes you feel most appreciated? Or when you hear a good apology, what's included? And then the opposite. When you hear a bad apology, what's wrong with it or what's missing? And their answers will usually give you a pretty good guess about what they need to hear. And I'll tell you a personal story about when I had this apology language conversation with my family. 15 of us had gone to the beach back when that was a thing, right before When Sorry Isn't Enough was being released. And I said to them a couple of things. First, I'd like to make sure that I know your apology languages so I can apologize to you. So let's talk about what you want to hear. And then the second thing is, I said, I don't expect this, but it's possible that I've offended you over the years and I don't even realize it. And if you think me writing an apology book is the most ironic thing you've ever heard of, then I want you to tell me. And so I literally had them lined up like crows on a line, and we went down the row, and they they said, no, Jen, you actually live this stuff out. I've seen you get your feelings stepped on by your friends, and you don't just walk away. Actually, you're in there trying to figure out, can we agree to disagree? How can we respectfully work our way through this so that we at least have some kind of passable bridge of communication that we can still walk across and enjoy being together?
Very good. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. My sense is that maybe there's a whole nother section on Mars versus Venus of this and the way men and women react to the two things. Would that be a good guess?
Yeah, I think probably so. Yeah, and probably some fresh examples of offenses with us being all cooped up in our own homes.
Okay, well, maybe we'll have you back on and we'll just work on that. If we get 50 couples all asking questions, we'll know we've hit a nerve. So, Jen, thank you so much. We appreciate you. And even though we can't see your blouse right now, I'm sure that it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. You listened so well, Dennis. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, again, hopefully it's been helpful for some of our audience. And as usual, we have recorded this. And so over the weekend on the SFG YouTube channel, it'll be available on your regular series. And then on Monday, you'll be getting the link to that. And you'll also be getting the link to Jen's website and be able to follow up on that if you want to with Jen. So thank you again, and everyone have a great weekend.
My pleasure.